October 1941. The Soviet Union was losing the war. Following the German invasion in June, the Red Army was suffering catastrophic losses in personnel and equipment. In the early months of the conflict, some estimates placed daily casualties in the tens of thousands. German forces were advancing toward Moscow. The front was collapsing. The state required pilots. It did not have enough. This acute manpower shortage became the immediate catalyst for mobilizing women into combat aviation roles. The decision was not primarily ideological, it was practical. The initiative came largely through the efforts of Marina Roskova. Roskova was a nationally recognized aviator who had achieved prominence in the 1930s for long-distance record flights, including the 1938 flight of the Rodina. She held the title Hero of the Soviet Union and used her status to petition the Soviet leadership directly for the creation of all-female combat aviation units. In October 1941, authorization was granted for the formation of the 122nd Composite Air Group under her leadership. That formation would later be divided into 3 all-female regiments: the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Only one of these units would remain entirely female throughout the war, including pilots, navigators, mechanics, and ground personnel. The 588th. Recruitment drew volunteers, many of them university students or members of civilian aviation organizations such as Oswawiakim. Training took place at Engels. Standard military aviation instruction, normally spanning several years, was compressed into approximately 3.5 months. Navigation, engine maintenance, meteorology, formation flight, and night procedures were condensed into an accelerated program. Uniforms were male issue and often required alteration. Boots were frequently oversized. Cockpit seating had not been designed for smaller frames. In February 1943, the unit was redesignated the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, an elite classification within the Soviet Air Forces. Later that year, following operations on the Taman Peninsula, it received the additional title, Taman. By the end of the war, its formal designation was the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. They were issued an aircraft that had first flown in the late 1920s. It was constructed primarily of plywood and canvas stretched over a wooden frame. It featured an open 2-seat cockpit. There was no canopy protection from wind or sub-zero temperatures. It lacked modern technical amenities such as radios, internal armor, or advanced navigational instrumentation. Its name was the Polikarpov Po-2, originally designated the U-2. It was powered by a Shvetsov M11 series 5-cylinder, air-cooled, radial piston engine. The technical characteristics of the Po-2 dictated its employment as a nocturnal harassment platform. Its slow speed and fragile construction made it extremely vulnerable to German anti-aircraft fire and fighters during daylight hours. Maximum speed was approximately 94 miles per hour. Under full mission load, effective speed decreased to roughly 60 to 68 miles per hour. The stall speed was low, allowing controlled flight at speeds that complicated interception by faster fighters, such as the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and FW-190. The service ceiling was approximately 3,000 meters, though combat operations were typically conducted between roughly 400 and 1,200 meters during bombing runs. The standard bomb load is most frequently documented at approximately 300 kilograms. Bombs were mounted on racks beneath the lower wings. Release was manual. There was no modern bomb sight. Targeting relied on estimation, repetition, and accumulated experience. Fuel capacity limited endurance. Because payload per flight was modest, operational impact depended on repetition. Sortie after sortie. Night after night. Missions were conducted exclusively between dusk and dawn. During peak periods, crews flew what were known as maximum nights: 8 sorties, 12 sorties, sometimes 18 sorties in a single night. Each flight typically lasted between 30 and 50 minutes. Landing, refueling by hand, bombs reattached manually, engine inspection, taking off again. Night navigation relied on compass headings, paper maps, terrain silhouettes, rivers, and distant fires. There was no radar guidance, no onboard communication system linking aircraft. Approaching the target, pilots would throttle the engine to idle and, in some cases, shut it off entirely, allowing the aircraft to glide toward the release point. Without engine combustion, the acoustic signature dropped sharply. The approach could be nearly inaudible, apart from airflow over struts and wires. German defensive systems relied heavily on coordinated searchlights and anti-aircraft batteries. When illuminated, a slow aircraft could be bracketed by flak bursts. To counter this, aircraft often operated in groups of 3. 2 entered first, drawing searchlights and defensive fire. The third glided toward the objective. Roles rotated until each crew had completed its run. Bomb release was manual. In freezing temperatures, release cables could stiffen or jam. Some accounts describe navigators climbing partially out of the cockpit to clear obstructions mid-flight. After release, engines were restarted. With reduced weight, climb rate improved. Departure followed at low altitude to minimize exposure. The regiment operated for approximately 1,100 nights. Documented combat sorties across sources range between approximately 23,600 and 30,000. Total recorded flight hours exceeded 28,000. Bomb tonnage is most frequently recorded at approximately 3,000 tons, along with roughly 26,000 incendiary shells. The operational impact lay in accumulation. Repeated harassment missions disrupted supply lines, rail networks, river crossings, and fuel depots. Targets included 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored vehicles, and 86 prepared firing positions. In addition, 155 supply drops were delivered to Soviet ground forces. The regiment sustained 32 fatalities during the war, including Marina Raskova. 23 members received the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The regiment was among the most highly decorated female units in the Soviet Air Force. German soldiers compared the gliding sound of the aircraft to the sweep of a broomstick. When it became known that the pilots were women, the nickname emerged: Nachthexen, night witches. While the term was originally used by the German military as a derisive slur, it was adopted by the members of the 588th as a badge of honor. Several accounts report that German airmen who shot down one of the aircraft were reportedly considered for recognition, including the Iron Cross, though documentation of this as formal policy remains limited. Before the war, women had been trained in civilian aviation clubs during the 1930s, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all pilots in the USSR by 1940, but they were generally excluded from military combat roles until 1941. The transition to active combat was driven by the extreme casualty rates of the early war and the immediate need for personnel to defend Soviet territory. As the war approached its conclusion in 1945, the Soviet government began a shift toward pro-natalist policies to address the massive loss of population. Laws were enacted to encourage large families, and women were increasingly pressured to return to domestic roles. Consequently, the 588th Regiment was disbanded in October 1945, and the majority of its members were demobilized. Most were prevented from continuing careers in military aviation or attending service academies. While the regiment's achievements were used for propaganda during the conflict, their contributions were largely marginalized in official post-war military histories for several decades. The history of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment suggests that sustained combat effectiveness was achieved through tactical adaptation and institutional discipline rather than technological superiority. Their record offers a documented historical example of women performing prolonged combat aviation roles within a mechanized military structure under conditions of total war. The state that had mobilized them in crisis redirected them toward domestic reconstruction. Their combat record remained. Their institutional access did not.